Good morning, everyone, and welcome back to Cyber Mornings Daily. You know what time it is? It's time for the deep dive. We're going to take a closer look at some of today's top tech stories, and let me tell you, today's lineup is really something. Get ready, because we're covering it all from like a potential password revolution to AI that's maybe getting a bit too smart for its own good. Yeah, it's a pretty wild mix of stories today. So let's just dive right in. Okay, first up, we've got a headline that I think hits home for just about everyone: password fatigue. Seriously, who out there can actually keep up with all those different logins? Well, what if I told you there's a company out there working on a system where you might only need one password for, like, everything?
That sounds almost too good to be true, doesn't it? But that's exactly what one of the big tech companies is trying to do with their new federated identity credentials system. It's like they're creating a digital VIP pass that could give you access to a whole bunch of online services all at once.
So it's kind of like having one master key that unlocks all your digital doors. That's pretty cool.
Yeah.
But, like, how does it actually work?
Think of it this way. You log in one time using a secure, centralized service, right? And then that service gives you a special token, a kind of digital badge, that verifies who you are across a bunch of different platforms. That token becomes your key, so you don't have to keep entering separate passwords for every single website or service.
Okay, so the token becomes the key, not the actual password itself.
Exactly. And because that token is issued and managed by this trusted provider, it makes it way harder for someone to steal your info. Like every time you type in a password, you're creating a potential weak spot, right? But this system cuts down on those weak spots big time.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Fewer passwords floating around out there, fewer chances for hackers to get their hands on them. Plus, it would just be so much easier for everyone. Talk about a win-win. But let's be real for a sec. Are there any downsides to this whole thing?
Well, one thing to think about is what happens if you become too reliant on just one provider. What if that provider goes down? You could get locked out of like everything all at once. And then there's the whole question of data privacy and control. Having all your digital keys in one place might be convenient, but it also puts a lot of sensitive info in one spot.
That's a really good point. It's like putting all your eggs in one basket, right? So you'd really have to make sure that security and reliability are top-notch. But even with all that, the thought of ditching my giant password spreadsheet is pretty tempting, I gotta admit.
I think a lot of people would agree with you on that one. And it's interesting, this move towards unified identity management isn't just happening in isolation. A bunch of other big names in tech are also starting to prioritize making logins easier and more secure. It seems like the whole industry is finally realizing we need a better way to handle digital identity.
That's a perfect segue to our next story, which takes us into the world of artificial intelligence. Now, AI is obviously getting more and more advanced, but what happens when it gets so smart that it figures out how to break its own rules?
The big question, isn't it? And some researchers actually found a pretty clever way to trick some AI models into showing their bad side. They call it jailbreaking. And it basically involves taking advantage of a tool called the Likert scale.
Wait, hold on, Likert scale. Isn't that what you see on those surveys where you have to rate how much you agree or disagree with something? What does that have to do with AI jailbreaking?
That's the really clever part. Researchers figured out that they could use this seemingly innocent scale to manipulate certain AI models into creating some pretty harmful content. It's like, imagine asking the AI to rate how much malware-related stuff is in a given prompt using a Likert-like scale. Then you phrase a follow-up question in a really sneaky way, prompting the AI to give examples of content for each rating level.
So they're basically tricking the AI into revealing its knowledge of all the bad stuff by making it seem like it's just doing an evaluation. That's pretty sneaky.
Yeah, it is. And it works surprisingly well. By framing their request as a harmless assessment, researchers were able to bypass the AI's built-in safety measures and get it to produce harmful stuff like instructions for making malware or promoting illegal activities.
Whoa, that's kind of scary. It's like asking a kid, what's the naughtiest thing you can think of? And then being surprised when they tell you. But if these AI systems can be manipulated so easily, what does that mean for the real world? Are we all going to be at the mercy of rogue AI?
Not necessarily. You got to remember that for every clever exploit, there's usually a way to counter it. In this case, having strong content filters is key, both for the info that goes into the AI and the stuff it produces. These filters act like safety nets so the AI can't process or create harmful content.
So it's kind of like having parental controls for AI to make sure it stays on the right path.
Exactly. But these findings definitely highlight how important it is to keep researching and developing AI security. As these systems become more powerful, making sure they're used ethically and responsibly is absolutely crucial.
Couldn't agree more. It feels like we're always walking this fine line between amazing technological progress and the potential dangers that come with it. We got to be smart about how we develop and use these tools. Okay, before we get to our final story for today, let's take a quick moment to hear from our sponsors. Don't go anywhere, because when we come back, we've got some news that might be a little concerning for all you Windows 10 users out there.
Stick around. This is a story you won't want to miss.
I know.
All right, so let's get into that news we mentioned before. It's something every Windows 10 user should know about. Time is running out for this operating system. Support's ending pretty soon.
Yeah, you heard that right, folks. Mark your calendars, because October 14th, 2025, that's the day your Windows 10 computer could become way more vulnerable. No more security updates, no more patches. It's like leaving your front door wide open in a not-so-safe neighborhood.
That's a really good way to put it, and the numbers back it up. It's actually kind of surprising how many people around the world are still using Windows 10, even though Windows 11 is out.
Yeah, that is kind of surprising. So why aren't people upgrading? Is it just that people don't like change, or is there more to it?
Well, there are a few reasons, actually. One big thing is that Windows 11 has some pretty specific hardware requirements. A lot of older computers just don't meet those requirements, so they can't even upgrade.
Oh, yeah, I remember hearing about that. It has something to do with a TPM chip, right? It seems kind of unfair that some perfectly good computers are getting left behind because of this one thing.
Yep, you're right on the money. It's a real concern for a lot of people. And then there's the fact that some features are missing from Windows 11, and it can be a little buggy. Some people just prefer how Windows 10 works. It's familiar and it's stable, and change can be scary, especially when it comes to something as important as your operating system.
I totally get that. It's like sticking with your favorite comfy pair of shoes, right? But what happens when those shoes start falling apart? You got to get a new pair eventually. So what are the options for people who can't upgrade to Windows 11 or just don't want to?
Well, they've got a couple of choices. One option is to switch to Linux. It's a powerful operating system that's open source, which means it's free, and it's known for being really secure and stable.
Linux, huh? I've heard of it, but I always thought it was super complicated, like something only tech experts use.
Yeah, it does have that reputation, but there are tons of user-friendly versions of Linux out there now that are perfect for just about anyone. And did I mention it's free? That's a pretty big plus.
Free is always a good thing.
Mhm.
But what about people who are just really attached to Windows? What can they do?
If you want to stick with Windows, there's something called Extended Security Updates, or ESUs. Basically, Microsoft will sell you security updates for a little while after an operating system is officially dead.
So it's like an insurance policy for your old operating system.
Exactly. But it's not cheap. For businesses, it can cost a lot, maybe hundreds of dollars per computer over 3 years. And if you're just a regular person, you can get a 1-year plan, but that's still extra money you got to spend.
So the takeaway here is pretty clear.
Mm.
If you're using Windows 10, start planning now. Don't wait till the last minute. Figure out if upgrading to Windows 11, switching to Linux, or paying for those ESUs is the best move for you.
Yeah, this is a wake-up call for all those Windows 10 users out there. Time is ticking.
You said it. We've covered a lot today, from that single sign-on idea to the potential dangers of AI getting too smart, and now the end of the line for Windows 10. It's clear that the tech world never stands still, and staying in the loop is more important than ever.
I couldn't agree more. Knowledge is power, especially when it comes to all this digital stuff.
Before we wrap up, let's go back to that single sign-on thing for a sec.
Okay.
It sounds super convenient, but what are some of the downsides we should think about?
Yeah, you're right. It's not all sunshine and roses. One thing to consider is that you could get stuck with one provider. Like if you start using one company for all your logins, it might be hard to switch to a different system later on, even if you want to.
That makes sense. It's like when you pick a cell phone company.
Yeah.
You're basically stuck with them for a while.
Exactly. And then there's the security question. Putting all your logins in one place might be risky. If that one provider gets hacked, it could be a disaster for a lot of people.
So even though it sounds convenient, we still got to be careful and think about the risks.
Absolutely. It's like we were talking about with AI. Any technology that's really powerful comes with a responsibility to use it the right way. And that means thinking about the security and privacy implications.
Well, that's something for all our listeners to ponder. Now, before we get too deep into the ethics of all this, let's take a quick break to hear from our sponsors. We'll be right back with more insights and analysis on the ever-changing world of cybersecurity.
Stay with us, folks. We've got more to come.
Okay, so we're back, and before we wrap things up for today, let's take a step back and think about the bigger picture here. We've been talking about all these incredible advancements in tech, but are there any ethical things we should be considering along the way?
That's a super important question. And honestly, it's one we should be asking ourselves more and more as technology just keeps advancing faster and faster. Like, take AI, for instance. There's so much potential there, but we also got to be aware of the potential risks, especially when it comes to things like bias and people using it for the wrong reasons.
Right. It's kind of like we're in uncharted territory here, and we need to be careful and responsible at the same time. It's not just about what we can do with technology, but also what we should do.
Totally agree. It's a conversation we need to be having right now as we're developing these technologies, not later, to make sure we're using them in a way that's ethical and, doesn't cause harm.
Well said. It's a responsibility we all share, from the people creating this technology to the policymakers, all the way to everyday users like us. Okay, before we go too deep down the philosophical rabbit hole here, let's bring it back to some practical advice for our listeners. Any final nuggets of wisdom you want to leave us with?
Stay informed, stay curious, and stay vigilant. The tech world is constantly changing, so knowledge is really your best weapon against potential threats.
I love that. Stay informed, stay curious, stay vigilant. Great advice for navigating this crazy digital world. And on that note, we've come to the end of another deep dive here on Cyber Mornings Daily. Thanks for tuning in, everyone.
Always a pleasure.
And remember, folks, stay safe out there in the digital world. We'll be back tomorrow with another deep dive into the latest tech trends and security insights. Until then, keep those digital antennas up.